Right now, though, let's turn our attention to my next guest. He is a Labour MP in Murray's Shadow as Scotland Secretary, and he joins us live now from College Green. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much for joining me. Lots to talk to you about. Obviously, this sub-story has taken over lots of the oxygen of what's going on in the media today. But let me just ask you, first of all, about the mortgage situation and those latest grocery inflation figures, 16.5% for grocery bills, far higher than the official main inflation rate. We've seen energy bills obviously going sky high and mortgage rates going up a huge amount. They've pretty much doubled in the last year overall. That means we're going to see 1.4 million people coming off fixed rates mortgages in the next year before the next election, realistically, who are going to be seeing an average extra payment of almost £3,000, according to the Resolution Foundation. What is Labour's solution to all of that? What would you do if you were in power?
Well, I think the underlying problem here is that the current government have lost control of the economy, and this is a circular problem. If you lose control of inflation and the Bank of England have the remit to get inflation down to 2%, and the only instrument they have is through interest rates, and interest rates are going to rise, and we've ended up in a situation whereby we have low growth in the economy, we have high taxes, we have high inflation, and we have increasing interest rates, and that cocktail together has been a result of decisions this government have made. We have set out for over a year now a fully costed plan to help people more with their energy bills by taxing properly with a windfall tax on the oil and gas sector and getting that down to people's bills. We need to get food inflation down. The 16.8% or 16.6% that you've mentioned there means that prices are rising by that. It is a reduction from the previous month, but they're still rising, and the products that are bought by the most vulnerable and poorest in society are the ones that are rising the quickest. This is a real problem for homeowners, for renters, for landlords who are renting their properties, for people who are buying food, and the cost of living crisis looks no sign of abating, and all the polls show that the public don't think the government are doing enough or anything about it.
The public don't think that. However, I mean, I find it fascinating. I asked you what you would do differently. All you come up with is this, the windfall tax. I mean, this is the answer to everything. If I, do you like poppies? The answer from a Labour MP, Shadow Cabinet member, would be, oh, windfall tax on oil and gas. How on earth would that bring food prices down? Food prices have gone up because post-lockdown, Ukraine war, hit on global food prices. Energy prices went up largely because of, post-lockdown, the Ukraine war, all that. I mean, what would you be doing differently? Why would things be any better right now if Labour were in power? I mean, look, we can all criticise what governments do, what they don't do, but what I ask you, what would you do right now? And I don't think a windfall tax on North Sea oil is going to solve any of those problems.
Well, I was giving you an example, but one of the key components of inflation, of course, is energy prices. That has been driving inflation up, and hopefully the energy prices stabilising there will bring inflation down. In terms of food inflation and overall inflation in this country, it's much higher than most of our peers because of decisions the government have made on energy and on other things like skills, on the ability for us to be able to have food processing here. The energy costs for food processors as well are huge because they weren't covered by the energy guarantee, and therefore their energy costs have rocketed, and that's been feeding through to food prices.
Yeah.
So this is all
Labour would have carried on with that.
One example, but actually,
yeah. But you're saying that they didn't get the help, so you're saying they should have had the help, and if they'd had the help, of course, that would be added on to the government's bill. They're borrowing, huge interest payments. Is the solution Labour's energy policy?
It would have been paid for by a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies.
Of course it would be. I mean, I'm going to get the tube home from my show today, and that's going to be paid for by the windfall tax. Julie.
Well, that's £10 billion on the table that the government are refusing to take. That's £10 billion that could be going to help this situation. So if the government thinks it's acceptable to let the oil and gas companies, in the words of their own CEOs, have a cash machine and unprecedented excess profits on the back of these crises, then that's absolutely fine. But we believe that money should be going back into the economy and helping the economy directly in terms of food prices and energy prices.
Most of those profits are not being made on basis of householders in the UK. They're being made abroad. We can't just go around taxing the profits that Shell make, on the other side of the planet.
Well, it was a Treasury report and an Office for Budget Responsibility report that showed that there could be as much as £170 billion on the table there, government figures, not ours. And I think whether it be £1, £1 billion or £100 billion, there's a real issue here in terms of making sure that those that are making those ongoing gains is better than leaving that on the table and letting the public pay for the mess that has been made by this government.
OK. Yesterday, Keir Starmer, your leader, and by the way, I don't apologise to people who aren't watching, he's live in College Green. There's been a lot of rain and a lot of very noisy traffic, so you're persevering very well. I'm sure it's quite difficult to hear, so thank you for that, Ian Murray. But your party leader, Keir Starmer, gave a speech in Scotland yesterday and they said a Labour government would lift the ban on new onshore wind farms, tearing up planning laws if necessary to do so, but also said they wouldn't cancel any new licences for North Sea oil and gas that had been agreed before Labour come into power. You've had to reassure oil and gas companies about that, but vowing to throw everything at net zero to make Britain a clean energy superpower. This has echoes of Boris Johnson saying he wanted us to be the Saudi Arabia of wind. Is it possible to be a superpower whilst also relying on unreliable clean energy?
Well, I think the global race for green energy is actually on at the moment, and the UK are well behind in that. It's OK for Boris Johnson to talk about the UK being a Saudi Arabia of wind, but he didn't deliver anything towards that. What the announcement was yesterday was a really ambitious and bold plan to give us clean energy by 2030, create hundreds of thousands of new jobs, to create a supply chain in our deindustrialised parts of the country, to spread that wealth across the country, set up a publicly owned GB energy company that would share that wealth but also allow industries to have that route to market to create that green energy, to provide that energy security here at home and indeed to meet our climate requirements. This is actually a very exciting and ambitious and bold policy backed by the industry, incidentally. Yeah, of course, there's a misalignment in terms of new licences that the Keir has committed that he wouldn't approve if he was Prime Minister, but it's up to us as a government to meet those ambitious plans for 2030 and show that the just transition in terms of those hundreds of thousands of jobs can fill the gap of the fossil fuel jobs as a result.
Are they going to fill the gap?
Oil and gas out of the North Sea for many decades to come.
Are they going to fill the gap of all the jobs we're going to lose because energy prices are going to be so high and industry can't rely on there not being blackouts or brownouts, and they just simply take all their jobs abroad?
Well, actually, what's happening at the moment in terms of the green energy industries in this country is the only thing that the UK and Scottish governments are creating are jobs abroad. We should be creating those jobs here, and it's up to the government to provide that mission so that the entirety of the industry can create the jobs here, which means we can create our own energy here, which means it's secure, it's more affordable, saving families up to £1,400.
It's not going to ever be secure, and it's not going to become more affordable unless it's got more subsidies, and that means the government, we're paying through it as taxpayers. It's by definition, the wind and the sun are not secure. That's why we moved to fossil fuels in the first place. That's how we powered the Industrial Revolution and all the advantages we have in life. Even in 40, 50 years' time, there is no one who knows about this subject. Don't have to agree with me on this. No one who knows about this doesn't believe that we will not still be massively reliant on fossil fuels. 80% of our energy is still fossil fuels. It will continue to be so. You want to, have no new North Sea oil, gas and oil licences. You don't want to frack. All credit to you, want to build more nuclear power stations. That's great and good, and the Tory government has failed on that. But at the end of the day, you are not going to keep the lights on. You're not going to keep industry running, relying on wind and solar.
Well, actually, the industry backs this plan, and they think it's an ambitious plan that they're able to meet by 2030. So
ambitious is Whitehall speak for this is mad.
To what you've said. You would have a nuclear base load, you have much more community nuclear proposition, you have wind, you have solar, you have tidal, you have wave. It's about backing those new technologies and meeting this by 2030. It's offshore wind, it's quadrupling offshore wind in this country as well. We have the resources to do this. We just need a government mission and ambition to be able to deliver it. So whilst you're saying the lights won't stay on, that is just not the case, because in actual fact what this does is secure our energy for the future, but it makes it green, it creates the jobs, it means that we're able to be a global leader in the research and development of this, and it meets our climate requirements. There is no downsides to this whatsoever.
No, none at all. None at all.
You put in your question.
None at all. No, sky-high prices and unreliable energy and talk of blackouts. No problem at all. I mean, tell you what, will you promise to come back on the show when we have the first blackout?
Well, you'll not have any
you?
electricity to have your show, so but there'll certainly not be
We'll be doing it by
during.
candlelight.
I think that kind of scaremongering is completely wrong with this policy. The policy is there for people to read.
Scaremongering is saying we've got a climate catastrophe, we're all going to die.
Policy. It creates hundreds of thousands of new jobs. It creates the UK as a green superpower.
It creates new jobs in China, where they're manufacturing solar panels and wind turbines in factories powered by coal.
Well, President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is investing heavily in this. It's been seen around the world as something that this government actually said was creating a distortion in the marketplace because they were streets ahead of this country. We just need to get on with doing this to 2030. It's a hugely ambitious plan, backed by industry and backed by the energy industry itself, and that's incredibly important to make sure that your listeners and your viewers know that.
Ian Murray, just finally, I want to ask you about the Privileges Committee vote last night. Got a couple of clips, but I'd love to play, but the time is very short for us. Basically, we only had 6 Tories, and I think one Labour MP who basically called for there to be a vote, who supported Boris Johnson. Overwhelmingly, they backed the Privileges Committee report. Was that the right decision?
Well, I think the Prime Minister, if anybody knows where the Prime Minister was last night, maybe they could phone into your show and let you know. But the Prime Minister should have led by example yesterday, made sure that all of their Conservative MPs were down the Yes lobby to show that Parliament actually does have some dignity and respect for the public, and endorsed the report, the damning report against the former Prime Minister, who knowingly lied to Parliament, lied to the Queen, lied to the public, and really, through the worst health crisis in a generation, was sticking 2 fingers up to the public. And the Prime Minister is too weak to show any leadership last night and decided to hide somewhere that nobody knew where he was, in some cupboard somewhere, so he didn't have to vote on the report. I mean,
I think it's bang to rights. He's gone as Prime Minister. Glad he's resigned as an MP, and I support the Privileges Committee report. However, it's a bit much for Labour to be grandstanding on this when you quite happily, and some of your MPs openly said this, the likes of Margaret Beckett, that you were still supporting John Bercow sitting in as Commons Speaker as you were busy trying to undermine a democratic vote for the European referendum on Brexit, and happily allowing somebody who was known to be a bully, known to be basically, bringing grown men to tears behind the scenes, happy to leave him in the chair. It's a bit much for Labour to be grandstanding about doing the right thing in the Commons and showing respect to the House, isn't it? Come on.
Well, I think actually that's the biggest clutching I've ever heard. This is a damning report.
It is.
The Prime Minister of this country lied to the public and lied to Parliament knowingly during the worst health crisis, where hundreds of thousands of people died. People couldn't see their families and friends for the last time. They couldn't visit elderly relatives.
You supported those rules.
They couldn't live the life that they were supposed to live.
No, you supported those rules.
And to say that is equivalent to anything else is a dereliction of duty for this Prime Minister, not to take the lead and show some leadership on this issue and show that the Privileges report is indeed a report that we should be endorsing to try and clean up our politics. He's too weak to control his own party, too weak to be Prime Minister, and indeed by him not voting yesterday, he endorses everything that's been done by the former Prime Minister that this report says was wrong.
OK. Harsh words there for the Prime Minister, past and present there. Ian Murray, Shadow Scotland Secretary, Labour MP. Appreciate you joining us for a very noisy College Green. Sorry about that. Coming up, we're going to return to that missing Tory sub. Are there really any realistic hopes of rescuing this men alive, unless they have managed to resurface? We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk Breakfast.